We're live. So this is the Lockdown Children's Lit Fest. I'm Katherine Miller, and I'm joined today by the wonderful Katherine Rundell.
Hello.
Hello. Can I just check I'm pronouncing your name correctly?
Yes, no, completely right. That is exactly it. I don't tend to correct people when they get it wrong because I think Rundell actually sounds better, but it's Rundell.
Rundell. Well, lovely. So I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here today. I'm Katherine Miller. I've been teaching for 20 years, and I'm currently moving into becoming an education consultant, helping schools to motivate children to read. So I've done a lot of work on reading for pleasure, and just I've seen children's lives absolutely transformed by them getting into reading and therefore getting into learning and enjoying school much more. And it's just been an absolutely wonderful process. So with lockdown, I thought it would be a good opportunity to reach out to authors, and it has been an absolutely wonderful opportunity. And all those videos are available to watch again on my YouTube channel. I feel slightly ridiculous having a YouTube channel, and on the Facebook page Lockdown Children's Lit Fest. So if you're watching again, hello. If you're here live, hello. Please feel free to ask questions. And hello, Katherine. So would you like to tell us, first of all, your childhood memories of reading?
I was a late reader. Late, I think, in part because my parents were so wonderful about reading to us that I just had such a world of stories that it didn't really become necessary. So my earliest memories of books are all to do with family. My family fostered children from at-risk homes, and two of my sisters stayed with us forever. And there would just be this world in which we knew that the thing that would create a family overnight, or as close as you can get to overnight, is to read to children. It is a way of saying to them, you matter. And just for the next hour or half hour or 15 minutes, there's going to be nothing except you and me and this story. And it would be a way of drawing everyone together. So my first memories of stories are all stories that were shared stories. And it was just an absolutely fundamental part of how I understood how they work, what they do, their kind of alchemy.
That is such a wonderful experience, and so true. That I love that phrase, that there's nothing that brings you as close together as a family as stories.
And of course, there are so many other wonderful things that you can do as families, you know, exhibitions and movie watching. But there is something about reading out loud. The story comes in your own voice. You do the voices. You say, this is an act of conjuring, and we will all participate in it, and we will make something. It sounds a bit grand to say it like that, but it is true. When you read a story out loud, something is made, and it was sort of shot through my childhood, that knowledge.
Oh, how wonderful. So was there one particular book that you remember that was a family favourite?
We all agreed on was The Hobbit. Everyone loved it, and there were lots of others that 3 out of 4 of us might love. There was quite an age range. My older sister was 14 years older than me, but The Hobbit is just it is the universal paratext. It is just a stunning, fantastic piece of writing, and I think one of the things that we love most is we would often have it read to us at dinner table, and so you'd be eating, and The Hobbit is just essentially an adventure and then some food, and an adventure and then some food. And so, eating while reading about eating is such an enormous delight.
Absolutely wonderful. I love his stories for the language, that and not just the English language, the imaginary made up languages that he created. And I understand that he created whole grammars and lexicons and vocabularies, just that the masses of words that aren't contained in the book. I love that richness that's there.
Yes, that decision to commit so strongly to your own imagined world that you invent a grammar. I do think that is a remarkable brain.
So then how did you get into writing? Were you always a writer too?
I always loved I always loved writing. I used to write bad poetry from a very young age, and little stories. And I realized quite early on that a good solution for the question of what to give your parents for a birthday or a Christmas present would be to write them a story. So I started writing stories for my parents at about, I guess, 7 or 8. And some of them they kept. I wrote a full-length book. I mean, full-length. I was 8, for my father, called Sally's Surprise, and I found it. He'd kept it, and I'd sewn a cover with like little stars. And the surprise is that there isn't a plot. Like, surprise, nothing happens. It's a lot of descriptions of horses. But I have always loved the idea that you could dream something up and then make it permanent for you, root it in your own life by writing it down, a way of catching hold of the ephemeral, something that might just vanish. By writing it down, you root it and you give it to yourself. I think writing stories was a sort of a thing I did just for myself and in a bid to make my parents praise me.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love that kind of totally wonderful, mystical, that I'm going to capture something and make it real. And then, but please say that longer.
Exactly. I like a star. I always like a star.
Oh, we've got some people saying hello. Shall we give them a shout out?
Yes, wonderful.
Louise Whitaker, she's saying she's very excited. Catherine and Catherine. So hi, Louise. And Victoria Beale, hello, she's very excited.
And Elsa Isaacson. Elsa, that is a beautiful name, like Elsa Craig. Wonderful.
Lovely. So do you write? Do you feel that you need to write? Is it something that you do every day? Do you have a set routine as a writer?
I do. I think a lot of writers would say they would write anyway, even if I would do it if it wasn't my job. I think I would do it differently. I might not write exactly as I write if it wasn't my job, but there would certainly be a part of my day that was spent putting words down on paper, for sure. I used to teach full-time at Oxford University. I used to teach Shakespeare, and back then my routine was, I was much younger, so I didn't need to sleep. So I used to wake up at 4 a.m. and I would work on fiction until about 9, and that would be the glorious bit. I would drink sort of pure coffee for hours, and the thing about being awake before everyone else is that nobody is going to make a call. No one's going to want you, no one needs you. And so that was my own time. And then I would work on academic work and teach and finish my PhD during the day. And then I would try and work again a little bit in the evenings. And I did that for about a year. And I think now, thinking about that, I'm now 32. There is just no way that I could do that. I would die of exhaustion. But when I was, 25, you have a sort of ruthless ability that I think you don't have at any other time in your life. At least I haven't had since.
That's really inspiring and making me slightly mournful for my misspent youth. Do you feel that those hours, those magical hours, because now as a parent, my sleep's been completely destroyed and I'm well used to it. I love getting up at 5 o'clock, and now I quite often just potter about and I sometimes write a diary or do bits and bobs. Do you find that those hours are a little bit like the witching hour? They're a little bit magical and inspiration comes to you and that you might not at other times?
I think exactly that. I think you're completely right. There is something about time that is very close to sleep and where everyone else is asleep, and that it does feel like it's given freely, that it belongs only to you because you chiseled it out with force, with your claws. From your normal day, it feels special. I haven't done that for a while, and I think it might be a secret that I should be going back to. Maybe that's the way to get round feeling slightly stuck with a book. It's to wake up at different times and work on it.
Power on through. Wu has to saying hello to from Bugsy and Inca. They're wonderful names.
Hello, Bugsy and Inca. What lovely names.
And Emma's saying that she'd love to see the book that you made your father.
Oh, that's such a good point. I'll see if I have photos of it, and if I do, I'll put them on my Instagram. I think I have a picture of the front cover somewhere on my phone.
Oh, we'll look forward to that. That's a promise. I have to now. So, I wanted to ask especially about a book that is really dear to our heart in our family and was a firm family favourite. And now my youngest is 8. I can't wait to read it to her. It is the very fabulous Rooftoppers. Do you want to tell us why it's so special today?
I would love to. So today, Rooftoppers has this brand new cover, which is designed by Marielle Sorel. And I love the old one, but this one I do think is just absolutely glorious. And then it goes on the back and you can see buildings. And I just think she's absolutely gifted. She's so fabulous. And it now has a little introduction about how Rooftoppers came to be, and these rather beautiful chapter headings. I love an illustrated chapter.
Oh,
Fabulous.
that's really special.
For that to go out into the world. I hope lots of people see it and pick it up.
So this book is partly special to us because my eldest daughter, who's 15, it was a really firm favourite of hers, and my son, who's 12, he's just had his birthday. Well, I say just, it's probably 2 months ago. It was in lockdown, so I keep forgetting their ages. And it was a book that my husband read to them, and he loved it, my husband, because he found it so easy to do the accents, and he just thought that was just fabulous. So, firstly, why Paris? Why is it set in Paris?
I think at the time, I wrote this a long time ago now, I was 23, and Paris was my favorite city, and still remains one of my favorite cities. And it feels, when you go there, like a place where secrets are kept, and where if you turned it upside down and shook it, astonishment might tumble out. So it was partly that, and it was partly everyone who goes to Paris notices the astonishing beauty of the rooftops. Paris has these exquisite slate rooftops and, balconies and wildflowers and incredible chimneys. And I just thought that would be a place to be up high. And, and it's also a place with a rich tradition of music. And of course, music is very much part of the story. And it's the place where if I was a rooftopper, I would most like to live.
And what gave you the inspiration for Matteo?
Matteo is the chief rooftopper, and rooftopers are children who live up on the rooftops of Paris, and they have an entirely hidden life. And we don't see them because we always forget to look up. And they leap from rooftop to rooftop, and when it's too far, they string a tightrope between the rooftops, and they shoot pigeons with bows and arrows made out of weather vanes, and they have this whole life up there. And Matteo is the bravest and the toughest and the wildest of the rooftoppers. And he comes from a couple of people that I knew growing up, not all of whom were boys, but a kind of efficiency to their daring, a kind of calculated risks that they took with absolute bravado. When you're 9, the kids who are the bravest just seem to me wildly cool. And one of my best friend, Miriam, was very, very brave. So Matteo is a little bit based on her. And then the fact that he walks a tightrope was based on I walk a tightrope. And I walk a tightrope because Philippe Petit, who I've never met, but the great tightrope walker in history, he's sort of one of the top 10 ever to have breathed. Philippe Petit was the man who strung a tightrope between the Twin Towers, the buildings that were knocked down on September the 11th. But when they were first put up, they were the tallest buildings in the world. And he strung a wire between those two buildings. And as the sun came up over New York City without a harness or a parachute, he stepped off onto that wire and walked backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. And I heard about that and found it so beautiful and astonishing that I wanted that to be part of the story. The idea of someone who does something that shouldn't be possible, but they make it possible because they are so determined to grab hold of the impossible and shake it until it becomes possible.
And there's an absolutely wonderful film of him doing precisely that. He danced across, didn't he? And he taunted the
Right.
police, and
Yes,
just fascinating. I wondered how much of an inspiration he had been to you.
yes. This film is called Man on Wire, and if any families are watching this now, go and find it somehow. Hook or by crook, it is one of the best documentaries ever made, I think. And it has photographs of him. And he did this astonishing thing, half a kilometer up in the sky on a wire that is this wide. He puts down his balancing pole on the wire, and he dangles one leg down over New York, and he kneels on the wire, and he reaches up and salutes the birds. And I heard about this, and it's electric. It's like being given an electric shock to hear about it. And so that is one of the reasons that I wanted Matteo to be somebody who does things that no one else dares, and as such has a right to dictate whatever he wants, really, because he has a kind of authority that comes from his courage.
I think that you really capture his. Sorry, I can't remember Monsieur Petit's first name. I missed it.
Philippe.
Philippe. I think you've actually really captured a bit of Philippe in Matteo, because he's someone who holds the world at arm's length, isn't he? He doesn't get close to people, or the people who are close to him. He's aloof, not just because he's high on the wire. He dances to his own tune, doesn't he? And I think Matteo absolutely does that.
Yes, I wanted Matteo to be somebody who, it's sort of just gestured towards that he is a child who has had a difficult beginning, and as such holds himself apart from that which might harm him again. And so he is a little bit wary of everything, including love. And his friendship with Sophie is his first real friendship. And he likes her because she, despite not knowing anything about this world, just steps into it and says, I'll follow. I'll do anything. I'm brave and I'm tough. And also he likes that I'm talking about them like they're real people, but
they are.
but she has this determination that just because something is unlikely and we want it to be true doesn't mean it's not true. That our passions, the fact that we know that they are unlikely, is not an end, and change is possible, and hope is a truth. And so I wanted her to be someone who just casts aside doubt and just goes for what she wants. So it was very important to me that she does really push towards, I don't want to give away the ending, but
No. It is really inspirational. And I used to live in Paris, and I've actually just noticed behind me there, my wonderful when I had babies, my wonderful friends made me this quilt, and that little square says "Ooh la la." I wish that Rooftoppers had been around before I had lived in Paris, because I did look at the rooftops, but not nearly as much as I wish I had. So I absolutely need to go back.
I find myself longing. I've been rereading Rooftoppers when we were doing the cover, and I long to be back in Paris once lockdown is over and we can safely and responsibly travel. Paris is my first.
I feel a road trip coming on, Katherine.
Yeah, come with me.
Yeah. So we've got another few comments. Louise is saying her class loved Rooftoppers and she's now using the Explorer.
Oh, wonderful. Louise, please say hello to your class. I hope that they are enjoying it very much.
And we have from Katherine to Katherine and Katherine. It is, I was just showing Katherine before we started, an abundance of Katherine. This is entirely nothing to do with Katherine Rundell. It's by John Green, but it's the book that made me laugh out loud this year. It's fantastic. Anyway, sorry, that's an aside. From Katherine to Katherine and Katherine. Loving your interview, watching with my 9-year-old daughter Charlotte, and she is inspired to read your book. She commented that you have a really good imagination.
It's lovely. Thank you, Charlotte. That's very generous of you.
And Satnam says, good morning, Katherine. Nick, Bobby and Milo have just tuned in. Bobby loved Rooftoppers and he is now looking forward to reading The Explorer.
Wonderful. And P Cross says that she is coming to Paris too. P is the brilliant publicity person at Bloomsbury and just staggering, and there is no one who would be better to have in Paris. Please come to the...
That will be wonderful. Well, that moves nicely on to The Explorer, which is a book that I taught to my class. We had an absolutely wonderful experience, and this book actually switched on quite a lot of the children in my class to reading, to the joys of reading. So thank you for that. And I wanted to ask about this and The Wolf Wilder, which I've just reread in lockdown and have loved. They're both completely different in that this is set in a Russian winter and this is in the Amazon jungle, but you really evoke, you're so good at conjuring up this place in your mind that, you know, I felt cold reading The Wolf Wilder. How do you manage to do that, to get such vivid descriptions of place?
Thank you. I have been lucky enough to have the time and the ability to go to the places that I want to write about. So part of my family is Russian, so I have been to St. Petersburg quite a lot. And we went when I was maybe 14 in the deepest winter, and there was sort of snow up to my waist, and I had come from Zimbabwe, which is where I partly grew up. And so this snow was breathtaking and entirely new. And there is a kind of taciturn, tough brilliance to the Russians, I know, a kind of no-nonsense quality. So I wanted to try and summon that up in The Wolf Wilder. But then when I was writing The Wolf Wilder, I was visiting my parents. My father works for a NGO in Zimbabwe. And it was boiling hot, and I was trying to write this description of the 5 kinds of cold. And there's that thing that when it's very hot, it's very hard to imagine that it will ever be cold again, and vice versa. So I got, when my grandmother was alive, she was very into cocktails. So I had this huge lump of cocktail ice, the size of sort of that big. And I put it under my desk with my feet on it and rested my feet on it. And if you put your feet on ice for more than a minute, it starts to feel like your toes are about to drop off. And then I wrote about what it is like to have cold feet when I could truly remember again that truth. And then the Explorer, the same. I went to the Amazon rainforest and swam in the Amazon River. And a lot of the things in the Amazon are based loosely, the details are real on what really happened. We really did swim with pink wild river dolphins that just came swimming by chance under our boat. And even though I was fully clothed, I just pulled off my shoes and dived in after them and lost everything I had in my pockets, but it didn't matter at all. It was worth it. And, you know, we ate piranhas, which are quite easy to catch because they're so greedy. The only thing I've ever successfully fished, in fact, is a piranha. And there was a kind of staggering beauty about that. I have never been anywhere that looks so astonishingly wild, that has such color. You know, you would be in this boat and you would see overhead past like a carpet of red macaws, and they would suddenly, you know, they would almost cover the sky. It would just be breathtaking. And I wanted to try and capture that amazing beauty and put it in the book. And I also wanted it to be a gesture towards a historical moment when the British particularly were colonizing the world and were marching through the world, claiming and damaging and laying waste to the things that they wrongly thought were their own. And I wanted it to be clear that that kind of exploring is bleak and wrong, and that there are other kinds of exploring that are possible, the kind where you tread lightly and you record what you see and you preserve and you do not claim, because you cannot lay claim to the world.
Absolutely, and when I read the Explorer with my class, it was a bit of a call to arms for them, and they linked it very easily with climate change and being responsible in our own environment. So I wanted just to feed that back to you, that the children really understood that that's what you were trying to do.
That is what I hoped, that people would read it, and especially people aged between 7 and 14, and would think what they already know, and children are so empathetic, but that they would see even more vividly the future is fragile and the world is fragile, and the people who are going to have to preserve it are us now and them, and that we will have to think about it every day. We can't not think about it. That our duty. We are a generation who have been tasked with guarding the world, and we can't shirk it. I wanted them to remember that.
Well, I think that's been one of the truly wonderful things that has come out of lockdown. Seeing the photographs in India of the Himalaya, and understanding that there were a generation of people who haven't been able to see those mountains for 30 years because of pollution. And I really hope that there is something, that a wake-up call about lockdown. And your Book of Hopes was so beautiful, and it came so quickly and at the perfect moment, that I felt that it captured that sense of optimism, that actually this isn't all bad about lockdown, that this is a chance just to take a pause and a breath and reboot. So I wanted to ask, how did your collaboration come about, and how on earth did you create it so quickly?
With a lot of help. So what happened was, the Book of Hopes, I should say, is a book that is completely free to read online on the National Literacy Trust website. And it's got contributions, poetry and stories and essays and fabulous illustrations from more than 110 children's writers and illustrators. And it happened at the beginning of lockdown, when it all started. I was very miserable and very swept up in sort of sorrow and horror, and also very personally very worried, because my mother was in another country and I was very worried about her. And so I thought that the people who have it most deeply entwined in their job description to provide hope might be children's writers and illustrators, because there is a kind of duty when you write to tell children the truth about the world. And sorrow and darkness are truths, but hope is also a truth. And I think that children's writers are kind of hope hunters, that they are diggers and manufacturers and searchers and sellers and merchants of hope. So I wrote to them all and asked, in fact, of course, I emailed slightly more people than are actually in it, because some people weren't able to do it, saying, could you produce something, a piece of writing? And it doesn't have to be about hope. It has to be something that would kickstart hope within the reader. So then it's not like this is 100 stories thinking about what is hope. They're wild stories. There's people going to the moon, and a tooth fairy building a rocket ship, and real life essays about caterpillars that eat plastic, and brilliant illustrations by Axel Scheffler, who did the Gruffalo, and Lauren Child, who did Charlie and Lola. And the thing that was really wonderful was just my inbox just being flooded over 2 weeks with these stories, these brilliant, brilliant stories. If anyone is tempted to go and read it, there is a poem by Katherine Johnson called The Axolotl at Bedtime, which makes me laugh out loud every time I read it. It's just sensational. And there's a story by Anjali Rolfe, who wrote The Boy at Bucket Class, about an armadillo and a monk. And it's just like a little vodka shot of delight. It's just fabulous. And so I did the initial emailing, and then I did not do the book single-handedly. That was an amazing teamwork by Bloomsbury, who are going to publish the book in hardback in October. And B. Cross, who might still be listening, did a completely amazing job setting it up with the National Literacy Trust, and my wonderful editor Ellen Holgate did all the fabulous making it into a real book, because it looks like a real book, which I think is stunning. So if anyone is watching this and on the lookout for it's quite important that they're very short. They're not more than 500 words. So you can literally read one before breakfast and another before bed, and snack on them throughout the day. If you just need a little 5-minute burst of delight, I think it would be worth checking out.
Oh, it is absolutely. It's an absolute wonder, and I was hoping that they would publish it in a real
Yes,
form.
yes,
It's just beautiful, um, and I think it's really captured that zeitgeist of community spirit that we're experiencing as a nation. It's just really joyous and so necessary. I wrote down your phrase there. You said sorrow and darkness are truths, but hope is a truth too. I
yeah.
love that.
It is. It is, and I think we forget that at our peril. There's a brilliant book by Rebecca Solnit called damn it. Oh, so sorry. Lost its word. It's called Hope in the Dark, and it's about how we forget our triumphs and we remember our wars and our sorrows, but our triumphs are as real, and we need to remember them as a litany going forward so that we do not forget that change is not just possible, it's habitual. It's happened so many times, and that out of this great horror that we are currently in, it is very, very truly possible, if we all work towards it, that great good could come, possibly. And I live in hope of that.
Absolutely. Thank you. We've got some more comments. From Rosie, The Explorer is her favourite book.
Oh, lovely.
And Emily says that she's read The Explorer and Rooftoppers.
Brilliant. Thank you, Emily.
Ruth says, even your research sounds readable.
That's very kind. I do love it. I do love the excuse that I get to go and do things around the world and call it research. That has been a great stroke of luck.
Emma says, settings are really impossible to your stories. Which comes first, the settings, plot, or characters?
With The Explorer, the setting came first, because I wanted to do something that would allow me to write about the wonder of that world. Often it's a picture. With The Wolf Wilder, I had a picture in my head of a girl on a sled pulled by wolves, driving into the center of a Russian square with a red cloak flying behind her, because I wanted it to have a sort of fairy tale edge. And I thought what that story might be. And then also The Wolf Wilder is about a girl who tries to make tame wolves wild again. And that came from a real life thing near where I grew up in Zimbabwe, where they make tame lions wild again. So I stole that and made it snowy and made it wolves.
How do they do that?
Well, you can never fully make a tamed animal wild again. So with lions in Zimbabwe and in Southern Africa, there was briefly a very stupid fashion, particularly amongst the white elite, for buying lions and taking them to cricket games on a lead, which is just so profoundly stupid. And so what would happen is the lions would become teenagers, and then they would start disliking being on a lead at a cricket match. And one of them famously got away and went running through all the suburbs. And so this establishment was made where they teach lions how to hunt, how to chase, and ideally how to mistrust humans, and how to understand how to be around other lions. But they can never be fully wild, because once it's gone, it's gone. But you can rebuild something so close that you can give them a joyful life, or at least something close to freedom. And The Wolf Wilder is about wolves and about adventure and about snow, but I also wanted it to be about the idea that we can give back that which should never have been lost, that it is never too late to turn a living thing around.
Thank you. Dion's saying she loves Michael Morpurgo's story about the birds and animals caring for us in lockdown. It is so
that story. I completely agree. That is so wonderful.
Ailsa says, from Hattie, your story about the boy and the birds really was a burst of hope.
Thank you, Hattie. That is so kind. I'm very glad. I loved writing that. That was some of the most fun I've had in lockdown.
Sharon says, hello, your Jungle Book stories are fantastic. They made me emotional reading them to my children. And Dion says, which was the first book that you published?
So the first book I published was one that I wrote back when I was 21, which has lots of different names. It's called The Girl Savage in English, Cartwheeling Thunderstorms in American, At Home the Grass Speaks in German. And that was based very, very loosely on my own childhood growing up. But it's rather different from the others. The others are sort of wild adventure stories. And in my first book, very little happens. It's a little bit like the book that I wrote when I was 7. It's a lot of descriptions of horses.
Oh, well, I read The Wolf Wilder just recently again, and I was wondering, this was one of my favourite books as a child.
I had that edition. Yes, which is it's a fabulous edition, but it's so, I mean, the horse just looks so...
Falling apart. It's so loved, and then there's a wonderful giant on the back. Well, I wondered if you were inspired by this, because The Wolf Wilder really took me back to those cozy stories by the fire.
Very much so. The idea of sort of the old Russian tales, that collection in particular, but in fact, all of those Russian fairy stories. My grandfather used to tell them to me. He had married a Russian woman, and I love how wild the Russian fairy stories are and how completely willing to be unhinged. And so I wanted The Wolf Wilder to be very much reminiscent of the laws of fairy tale, which are, you know, that we will acknowledge our darkness and our brilliance, and that the wolves are often symbols in fairy tales for, you know, human hunger for power. Often the wolves are quite negative, and they're about human hunger for destruction or for other humans. But I wanted the wolves in this one to be about our hunger for justice. And so, you know, she wears the red cloak like Red Riding Hood, but the wolves are her allies. And there's a scene where she has a brand new gown made by the children. But instead of being like Cinderella and going to the ball, she goes to start the Russian Revolution. So I wanted it to be built on the idea of fairy tale, but fairy tale with a twist.
Mm. I love the character. She really, she's someone that you want to be. I think I want to be Theo from Theo or Feo.
Debate is always there. My Russian relatives say Feo. Oh, I can't remember now. Feo. They say Feo, so I say Feo.
But I shall say Feo too then. But she's just really, well, I think a lot of your characters in your book have that kind of strong-willed, kind of slightly anarchic sense of wanting to disrupt things and change the order. And just, I think they're really inspirational for children, because children often have that sense of impotence that, you know, I have to do what I'm told. There's so many rules at school and at home, and they have this secret desire often to break free. And I think your characters are really helpful for children to learn that actually they have more power than they feel.
Thank you. That is absolutely the core of what I want. When I was a kid, I found being talked down to one of the most unbearable things, because it seemed both an injustice and a mistake. Because children don't need to be talked down to. Children are as richly complicated and vivid as adults. And the idea that they're sort of in some way watered down adults used to drive me absolutely insane. And when I was little, the thing I craved most was autonomy. And I guess by autonomy, I would mean the right to make your own decisions and stand by them, and to go out into the world. And I was very lucky that my mother gave me quite a lot of freedom when I was little to climb things that were not safe to be climbed and run around without parental supervision, a kind of freedom that makes those memories sort of shine. And I know it's so hard for adults to do, particularly in England, and particularly in built up urban England. But where it's possible to let children play by themselves without adults watching and guiding, just to be their own self, I think it is transformational. And I want my books to tell children, you are tougher and braver and bolder than you think, and than people have given you credit for. You deserve to be seen as even more extraordinary than you are.
Oh, thank you. Well, that is absolutely what we need in our lives and what my children need. And I was telling you before we came on that my daughter, I can't believe I'm going to tell this story, has made a play shop out of our recycling, out of the glass bottles from the beer and the wine that we've been drinking, and the egg boxes and toothpaste, and it really struck me that she hasn't had the chance to play, and she hasn't, because she's missed that social contact and connection with her friends, she hasn't had that chance to be a bit wild and a bit free, and her life's been very contained at the moment. So we're going to try and put that right, and I think what she needs is a good dose of rooftoppers.
Yes, wonderful. Although possibly not actual roof topping. I am directly responsible for one sprained ankle and a broken wrist, as far as I know, possibly more, from children who have read rooftoppers and then actually gone on the rooftops. And I would say, kids, this is not the time. A pandemic is not the time to go climb on the rooftops. Despite it being good social distancing, we should not be taking roof-topping risks just now. Later.
Or playing with wolves.
Or playing with wolves, or swimming with piranhas. These are the days to stay safe.
Victoria is asking how much writing you do each day. Wolf Wilder at the moment.
Wonderful. Quite a lot. It varies enormously. I think that I'm not really capable, unless I'm on a deadline, of thinking coherently and in a focused way for more than about 4 or 5, 6 hours a day. That's an absolute limit.
Mm-hmm.
And some days it will be, I will sit at my computer and faff and read the news over and over again and write a paragraph. And sometimes I find myself in a rhythm and I find myself writing and writing and writing. So it does vary enormously. When I'm in the middle of a book and powering through it, I would try to write 1,000 words a day, which probably takes me anywhere between 2 and 5 hours. And then there are other things that I love doing that are part of writing but aren't actual writing. So emailing students, sending little videos to schools, responding to letters, talking about things like, what the covers should look like, which is always a really fun job. And so there's a lot of work that is to do with being a writer, but isn't actually writing. But actual writing, I am in awe of those people, and they exist, who can write 4,000 words a day. But
the accents really rolled off the tongue. The language was really joyous. Was that in your mind when you wrote it?
Yes, it was. I have this other life where I hold a research fellowship at an Oxford college, and I work on this guy, John Donne, the great Renaissance poet. And he has been my great passion since I was really quite young. My dad used to pay me to memorize poetry. And
That's a brilliant top tip. I'm going to do that.
With your children. I mean, back then there were these things called Puppy in My Pocket, which were little plastic toy dog figurines. And I was obsessed with them, and they were expensive. I mean, for a child, I think they were about £1. And so every 3 poems or so, I could get a new puppy in my pocket, which means that I memorized quite a lot of John Donne. And I think his desire to use language strangely and to push the limits of what was acceptable. I would not say at all that I write like John Donne, or I'm trying to push limits of what was acceptable like him. He was a genius and a visionary, but I gained from him quite young the sense that language is not a set of rules, it is a set of possibilities. And I wanted kids reading Rooftoppers to see that language isn't something that you have to do right. There is no right way to use language. Language is our game that we get to play for life, and we might as well play it with all the abandon and wit that we can. And so I wanted Rooftoppers to sort of make a case for that a little bit. There's a lot of metaphors in there that I probably wouldn't be writing now. There's a lot of mixed metaphors that sort of run away with themselves slightly, but I wanted it to be about what a gift language is to us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. That's a lovely comment, and that's very much in our experience. That my husband felt that too, that the accents were such fun to read aloud. Emily said she also read The Girl Savage, and Ruth says The Girl Savage is her favourite.
Oh, that's lovely. I also love this that Kath Rafferty says, my daughter is listening and gave me a look of, see, mummy, I should be given more freedom. I love that.
Brilliant. Absolutely. Diana is saying that she would love to read The Girl Savage with her daughter. Living in the UK, she would like her to have a sense of the atmosphere of a story set in Zimbabwe. You are so good at a sense of place in your books, and she's off to get The Girl Savage. Oh, brilliant. So Kath's saying a positive of lockdown has been the ability to play out more as less traffic and hazards and a greater community spirit, more like a childhood in the 80s. I would absolutely agree with that. My youngest has learnt to ride her bike without her stabilizers, and we have been able to go on beautiful long bike rides that we didn't with our elder two because there's been no traffic. It's been absolutely joyous.
Yeah, it is amazing that there's so little on the roads that you can almost treat them like paths. It's fantastic.
Siobhan's saying that she studied John Donne and other metaphysical poets for an A-level English and loved them. And she was about to ask how they influenced writing for children.
I think there is I think a sense that they and the other metaphysical poets, they decided that things that that things were previously thought to not to go together can go together. So John Donne writes about a flea and about his desire for a woman. And these were things that decorum and properness would say can't happen. If you're going to write about girls, you need to say they look like doves, not like fleas. And their desire to say, we will do what we want because the world is so strange and astonishing that if you pay attention to it, you will see that in some ways a flea is the exact perfect metaphor. That people who say that girls are like doves have not been paying attention. They have been listening to the cliche tradition, not to reality. And I love that about the metaphysicals, their desire to bend and make new. And I think a lot of people who love the metaphysicals in their writing want to try and capture a little bit of that sense that if we look carefully at the world, we will see that it is slightly other than the traditions that have hitherto existed would suggest, I think.
I love that. And I love that when you were right, that just brought to mind when you were writing about Matteo on the roof, eating the food that they had foraged. And even that made me think, oh, I want to be there. I want to experience that. That, as a pre-reading Rooftoppers, I would wander around Paris thinking, that it was full of kind of dirty animals, and it's not a very clean city at all. But actually, I definitely see it with new eyes now, having read Rooftoppers.
That is what I hope so much. And of course, I think that one of the things that I find it hard to read. I think most writers find it quite hard to read their own books because you just think like, oh, I wish I had a comma there, and I wish I'd changed that word. And but one of the things I do still like about the books are the food scenes, and food scenes are so important to me in writing. I have always vowed that any food that is in a book is real food that I have really tried because I want the details to be true. So in Rooftoppers, they have this feast up on the rooftop and they cook tomato soup in a cauldron on a fire next to a chimney pot and they stir it with chicken bones. And that tomato soup recipe is a real tomato soup recipe. And in The Explorer, they eat grub pancakes, and I really did eat the grubs in the Amazon, and really did eat piranhas. And in The Wolf Wilder, they eat a sort of stew made out of burned apples because there's just been a fire and that's all they have left, burnt sugar and burned apples. And I really have done that as well. So I have always said to kids that if you read food in my books, I want it to feel, as you read it, like you are truly hungry, so that you have rooted the imaginary world and the physical world into the same space. The only thing that I didn't eat in real life was the tarantula in The Explorer. That one I just asked the children who I met, indigenous children living in the Amazon, and they said that tarantulas were delicious. And so I wrote a story in which the tarantula is delicious. And then I started to worry that this was wrong, that I hadn't fact checked. So I ate a tin tarantula to check, double check my work, a tin tarantula. And in fact, if you Google Katherine Rundell tarantula on YouTube, there is a video of me eating this tarantula, because Bloomsbury said, well, if you're going to eat a tarantula, we will film it. So that is available for those who would wish, as a way of checking my work to see if I was correct in saying that they are delicious. Tin tarantulas taste like burnt hair. They are not delicious. I would not recommend them.
How on earth do you procure a tin tarantula?
Well, the people who supply Selfridges with their edible insects, because Selfridges sell
Do they?
vodka scorpions. The same purveyor provides tin tarantulas.
And is it in brine?
No, it's sort of curled up like this, and you have to sort of uncurl it. And I think it's lightly baked, and then also very ethically sourced. They're very keen to stress that. I mean, the thing about them, about tarantulas, is they have faces that look like they know your secrets and they judge you, which makes it really hard to then eat the face.
Oh, you didn't eat the face.
Yeah.
Oh, oh dear me. Oh, I don't think I could have done that.
I know. I mean, it wasn't even that necessary. I could have just eaten a leg. But so that is the only thing children reading The Explorer have to reckon. That all of the details are very truly true and very carefully researched. I did them myself, except the tarantula. But the tarantula is a fresh tarantula, so maybe that's different from tin tarantula. Never knows.
You are truly brave. I don't know how old you. We were fortunate enough when after university we went to South America for 6 months, and we went to we hiked through the Amazon, for not through the entire Amazon. It was 9 days worth. And I remember thinking before I went, oh, this sheer scale of it is going to be terrifying. It's going to be so big. But actually, when you walk through the paths, it's just like being in the woods at home, because you're just aware of your immediate vicinity. But we walked past a tree, and I looked down, and I had some baby tarantulas crawling over my boot. That was yeah, but I wasn't tempted to eat them at all.
No, we caught them. We were taught how to catch the tarantulas, and that's very easy to do. You just wriggle a stick over their hole and they think it's another tarantula, and you catch them round the back. But we did not eat them at the time. It just seemed a step too far.
So I think they put them on sticks, don't they, and toast them over the fire?
Yeah, I believe they actually are. I really do think they might be quite nice, freshly caught and cooked. I think once they've been, roasted, tinned, and shipped across London, a bit less nice.
Oh, Siobhan says that is dedication. Absolutely. Wow. So the Wolfwilder, you touched briefly on the 5 stages of cold when you're describing it, and that was a scene that really struck me. And sorry, I'm just trying to find the pages because I meant to look it up before we started. We were having a conversation last night. Sorry, you can maybe remember the 5 stages of cold.
I'm afraid I've forgotten them. They were entirely
blind cold was the worst cold, and that was the -40 degrees cold. We had a conversation around the dinner table last night. If you had the choice of being cold forever and then 5 minutes of warm. Would you go for that, or would you go for being hot forever and then 5 minutes of cold?
I would definitely be hot forever and then 5 minutes of cold, because I find it so hard to concentrate in the cold that I would never have written any books. Whereas at least in the very, very hot, you can sort of, you know, just plow your way through, more or less. What did you choose?
We all went for cold forever. I think we're my husband's Scottish, and we joke that in the summer he goes from blue to white, and we're all absolutely hopeless in the heat. And we also said that actually that feeling of 5 minutes of warm, just, if you had a shower and warmed up, how much more you would enjoy that than 5 minutes of cold. It's a silly game. Kath's saying that she would have taken the children's word for it about the tarantulas.
I probably should have. They were very adamant and very confident. So I think they were perhaps right about fashion.
David is saying that he went to the Amazon a few years back, had a lovely guide, a hilarious guide. He slept in the jungle, and the guide forgot the mosquito nets and suffered. Oh, I remember the mosquito. My husband was covered, and he got 2 ticks as well, so we had to pull the ticks out. But it was worth it, absolutely worth it.
It was so worth it. But I came back from the Amazon. We were there for quite a while with 170 mosquito bites, which is quite a lot for one person.
Bugsy and Inca are working on ancient Greece at the moment, and would like to ask if you have a favourite Greek myth.
There are so many that I absolutely love. That's a fantastic question. I love the Minotaur. I think that is an astonishing vision of. I mean, it's an incredible story, but this idea of the maze and the underground maze is such a brilliant way of expressing in myth and metaphor the sort of the dark, intricate parts of ourselves and the bits that we keep, the monsters that we ourselves keep down and out of sight. I think great myths, they really knew what humanity was. I think they knew our greatness and our dark.
Yeah. And Siobhan is asking, what is your one imagined unwritten to date book?
My unwritten book. Well, the book I'm currently writing right now is very much still largely unwritten, although due quite soon. I think there are so many books that I would love to write. Like many writers, I have a list, a little red notebook, where I keep just one-word ideas. So the very short story that I wrote for the Book of Hopes is called The Young Bird Catcher, and is about a boy with birds in his top hat. And that came from an idea that I wrote down years ago, and thought might become a story one day. And maybe one day I'll make that into something bigger. I don't know. I think I have a lot of half-written ideas, like most writers, I think.
And so I wanted to ask you about your experience of lockdown, the best and worst things for you.
I think the worst thing is the same worst thing that everyone feels. The fear for the people we love, and the fear for the people in much harder situations than I am personally. And reading the news is a profoundly bleak and angry-making experience at the moment. And I think that wears away at all of us, I think. I think the best thing has been my boyfriend's black Labrador, Rainbow, who I don't usually live with, but who now I live with. And Rainbow is a 4-year-old boy dog who leaps over gates instead of going under them, and has very powerfully expressive ears. And I think I would love to have my own dog, and living alongside a dog has just been amazing. How about you? What are your best and worst?
I think the best thing has been the hope, actually, just because I think I'm a profound optimist at heart, and I really hope that the world is going to be changed for good. And I've just seen myriad examples daily of people being wonderful to each other and wonderful to the world, and the weather has been phenomenal. So we've really enjoyed the garden and being outside, and the worst thing has been, I guess the flip side of that. I've found it profoundly depressing at times, really kind of lethargic and sluggish and unable to get going, and I found it hard to motivate the children. Just I think I've just felt more keenly.
Yeah, I did find that when I was emailing those 100 writers and artists asking them to do 500 words for the Book of Hopes, almost uniformly what people were saying was, I'd be very happy to, and and especially as be published in honor of the NHS charities, but that they hadn't been able to do any work because this sense of turmoil and we have to fight to keep seeing the possible good. It takes so much creative energy to do that from all of us, not just from writers, that I think they were really struggling. I think a lot of people were really, really struggling to actually do anything. But you're so right that there has been so many incredible iterations of people's goodness. There's a church quite near where we are, and the church is closed. But on the notice board, people are pinning their name and number if they're willing to help people in lockdown with shopping or help. And there is so many pinned that you can't actually even see all of them. It's like this cascade of people wanting to help. And I think that is a lovely thing.
I think that's what helps people get through. People, you want to help people, don't you? And when you're talking about creative energy, when we have been quite creative as a family. We've painted and sculpted and done all sorts of arty things, but when we've been feeling not so good, it's been creative that's helped us get through that. And actually reading, when I've talked to a few authors who've said that they've heard that lots of people are going back to childhood favorites, and that's definitely what we've been. It's been like the comfort read that we've wanted.
Yeah, exactly. Stepping back into a familiar place when the world itself is not familiar. I think it's such a valuable thing, such a joy.
Yeah. Victoria's saying, when do you get the feeling to start a new book?
It's a really good question. I have to think about it for quite a long time before I can start writing. So the one that I'm currently writing now, I was thinking about it while I was doing other things, like writing this book about John Donne for a year, to understand really what I wanted to say, how I wanted to say it, who would be saying it in the book. Sometimes it's more like a couple of months and I start to see it. A short story could just be a few days and you start to feel it. But I think there is a feeling, sort of like just before you sneeze, you know that you're ready to start. You could sort of feel the push starts to come and says, go sit down, stop faffing, start writing.
Rebecca says she's struggling to focus on reading and she'll use the Book of Hopes to hopefully break this pattern. And Dion said she was the same, and the Book of Hopes is a perfect way back to reading again.
I'm so glad to hear that from Dion.
Reading is such a comfort in this time, so I hope that everyone can. I understand that it's not the time for something tricky. Concentration is difficult. What survival tips do you have for getting through the rest of lockdown?
I have, I mean, my lockdown has not been exemplary. I have found myself often spending whole days furiously reading news about whatever politician it is. But the things that I have found that have got me out have been making things. So there was this initiative by the British Library to make tiny, tiny books like the Brontes, tiny books this big for each other. And they have a tiny book website. So if you Google it, you would find, I've made one for them, as have incredibly impressive people like Joe Coelho and Axel Scheffler, rather putting us all to shame. They're so beautifully done. Joe Coelho's one is leather bound. It's amazingly good. But I loved the simple act of cutting and writing and sticking and having something finite, something you can finish in a day, because lockdown is going to be a long time and it'll fluctuate, but we're looking at a lot of time. So having things where you can say, I'm going to start it and then I'm going to finish it, and the pleasure of finishing will be mine. I think that has been a big help. What about you? What have you found gets you through?
Well, creativity, definitely. We've made some little books, and yesterday my sister she lives on a farm and she sells eggs, and she had the sign stolen from outside her front of her house.
Do that.
Do that. So my son said it's a rival gang of egg sellers. So we're at the moment writing stories. My mum has said, right, there's a competition, and my children are very reluctant. I said to them, right, I'll do the writing. You tell me the story. So we wrote this story about, and actually it wasn't a rival gang. It was. So it was lovely. So just being creative and silly, and getting outside, and just and actually, who am I kidding? PlayStation has got my son through. The Simpsons has got my daughter through. Just
the things that will. Yeah, I've been watching a lot of Hitchcock movies and drinking quite a lot of wine, which I would not recommend to children, but would very strongly recommend to adults.
Yeah. So I like to pretend that I'm all noble and good and wholesome. We're not, but these are the things that have genuinely helped. Dion's quoting from your book, why you should read children's books even though you are so old and wise. I wish more adults would read modern day children's books for more hope and empathy for children in the world. And we're going to finish with Emma's question. What is your favourite children's book of all time?
That's an impossible thing to ask a children's writer. It depends so much on the day you ask me, but one of the ones I love most in the world is Charmed Life by Diana Wynne Jones. I think she is underread. I think even if every person in the world read her, she would still be underread, because we should all read her twice. I think for any kids listening, it's a little bit like Harry Potter. If Harry Potter were more ironical and sardonic and funny and sharp, and characters that you long to know. I read her when I was 8, 10, 12, and kept reading her. I never stopped. And there's a whole series. So if you like Charmed Life, there's a series called the Crestomancy series. They're broadly about wizards, but they're about everything. And they're called The Magicians of Caprona and The Lives of Christopher Chant. And when I was first starting out and just going to schools, I used to say, if you read Charmed Life and you don't like it, write to me and I will send you chocolate in the post, because I'm that confident. And for years I used to do that, and I got the most lovely letters from kids saying, I regret to inform you that I read Charmed Life and it was amazing. It was so sweet. And then I got one kid who read it and was like, not my kind of thing. So I sent him Maltesers in the post, but then I thought, well, I'll probably stop now.
Dion's saying her magic systems and world building is fantastic. We watched Hell's Moving Castle last week, which is the studio. We argued about this pronunciation as well. Studio Ghibli.
Ghibli, but I've never heard anyone else say it out loud. So I don't know.
But she's a wonder. Yeah, what you said much more eloquently than I could. So thank you so much, Katherine Rundell. It has been an absolute joy to talk to you today. Tomorrow we're back on the Lockdown Children's Lit Fest at 2 p.m. with an interview with the wonderful Julia Eccleshare, MBE of Children's Literature. So another really phenomenal interview tomorrow. She's the editor of the children's book section at The Guardian, and she's sat as a judge on numerous major children's books awards. What she doesn't know about children's books isn't worth knowing. So today, thank you, Katherine Rundell. Just been absolutely wonderful. Everyone go out and read Katherine's books. All of them are beautiful. It's the Rooftoppers launch today. It's a new edition. And I will put the link to the Book of Hopes in the Facebook page. And please, if you haven't come across that, go and read that. Dion's saying thank you, and Amy is saying her class loved the Explorer, really engaged the Year 6 boys. So thank you. Thank you, Katherine.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Bye.